Good afternoon and welcome to my talk. Thanks for the introduction. I may add that my practical music career has ended about 20 years ago. I'm focusing more on stuff I'm going to show you during this talk. Yeah, thank you very much, Wolff and Werner, for inviting me, and above all, thanks again very much for programming this fantastic meeting. I think this is a very good occasion to come together and has been a long-awaited dream of mine, to be honest. So I try to very shortly follow up some of the issues Werner just raised and try to close the gap to our century where he has left us. And in order to do so, I pick for every century just one individual and their endeavor. I try to make that very short. And I start with the 18th century and of course with Breitkopf. We all know the publishing house Breitkopf and Härtel, but the founder, Johann Gottlieb Emanuel, was actually a typographer and a printer, and he was a very versatile entrepreneur. Apart from his books, textbooks, he printed also maps and music, and he used this already mentioned movable metal type. Here's a sample for a very simple chord passage, and another one with just 5 bars of quite simple music, but you can see this method got out of hand very easily. So there are about 250 parts in order to compose this simple passage. What also is interesting with Breitkopf, he published a catalogue in 1762, I think, where he lists all his manuscripts that was in his possessions at these days. And he listed about 30 pages, like the one on the right-hand side, with incipits of the manuscripts in his possession. And at the end, he asks the reader to let him, Breitkopf, know any knowledge about more music from other composers and any corrections there may be spot in this catalogue. So I think this might actually be the first or the earliest form of crowdsourcing. And then we need to talk about Röder, of course. 19th century tycoon print and music engraving. And at the peak of industrialization, he really formed a European engraving and print empire. This picture is from the start of the 20th century. It shows his factory. It's not just a space within that block, it's the whole block. Huh? So he had then about 1,100 employees alone in Leipzig, with branches in Paris and London. So he combined plate engraving with a very advanced lithography technology at his time. So he was able to produce high print runs at relatively low cost. No professional music publisher of that time could do without him and his state-of-the-art services. Several further inventions, secured him the industry leadership. So if you're interested in that kind of print stuff from these days, the good old golden days of print, I recommend you should read Hugo Riemann. I mean, not his dictionary, but he had actually contributed to the 50th anniversary of Röder's company with a Festschrift. I think this is the only term, even in English, Festschrift. And in that Festschrift he wrote an extensive essay on notation and music printing. And he started really from the beginning and ended, well, in his days. This is the title page of it. And as frontispiece to this publication, there is a nice little image of that, and that depicts the complex tasks and how they are best being done by collaboration. You can see that from the divine inspiration directly being immediately engraved by the young lady on the left and subsequently printed by her colleague to the right. So my historic rush through ends with the 20th century and James Ingram, if anyone knows that name. Very good. Things have, of course, drastically changed now. The work environment for engravers in post-war Europe was rather, sorry, I need to go back. Oops. Yes. Here, was rather deprofessionalized and non-organized and fragmented in several individual businesses. So for 26 years, James worked for Stockhausen, for example, and this it started with that piece, Nori, before he had been sacked in 2000. And the circumstances under which he ended the relationship to Stockhausen speaks volumes about our trade. Under extreme deadlines, highly specialized, without social insurance, a freelancer in a non-professional environment. Notation of avant-garde music was at its peak of non-conformism and questioned all conventions. Ingram described the situation in an essay called On Being Invisible, which in a way triggered my talk. The advent of the personal computer changed our branch radically. I consider it impossible to describe the present state of it in a comprehensive way. Compared with other branches, we still work in a mainly non-professional environment, without any academic education, no vocational training, no professional organization. The job requirements consist in quite a long list of diverse tasks, impossible to fulfill by individual freelancers. But collaboration is still very weak and fees are low. Engravers normally do not tend to come forward. It's not in their nature to become visible. The market is highly competitive, badly funded, and thus enemy to innovation. So during the last 20 years, when we started Notengrafik Berlin, we have completed more than 500 jobs, probably summing up to a couple of 100,000 pages of engraved music through all niches of that industry. But instead of an abstract description, I will just share a couple of these jobs from a wide array for our work and with one common goal: to show the power of collaboration and communication. The essence of our job is to build up, maintain and control these fundamental abilities. Engravers need to look out for collaboration and networks. But to be able to do so, it is important for the involved parties to meet as partners. And this means that you need to be visible within your branch. It seems trivial, but this is actually the trickiest part of it. So my first example is by a composer, Enno Poppe, who is one of the few composers who sometimes delivers content to us in digital form. In which case we take care of the more fiddly details by completing and formatting his input before we then work on instrumental parts and final layout. In this example, the collaboration is about the lines. The composer didn't complete the whole input. I don't know if you can see the red details now. Maybe if I switch back and forth again. Yeah. So all you see marked in red is, of course, was developed in a dialogue, but it might not be lines, but dynamics or articulation or whatever other details he showed us. He was thinking about how to process this, but actually we did it. So it's a back and forth, give and take collaboration, a rather simple act, but very helpful. Just think about how this scales up for a big orchestral work. A similar situation we got with another composer with whom we have a long time relationship, and it's Philippe Manoury in this case. He uses pencil and paper, But when we discovered regularities on some passages in parallel motion, we agreed on a shorthand that Philip then used for his future manuscripts. Of course, it has to do with deadlines. This saved him, as well as us, many hours of engraving and above all proofreading. So if you know the intervals of the parallel movement, you don't need to decipher every single note. And of course, software kicks in here to be able to do that in a short period of time. So from that sketch, we were able to compile this typeset passage. Yeah, simple but very effective examples for powerful workflows. I have to repeat it. You need to communicate the rules and the methods and not just showing the results. Since if this is neglected, things can really go crazy, as we will see in the next case. We received a bundle of about 240 finale and PDF files from the publisher, undocumented, eventually full of duplicates. They represent sections of an Italian opera by a Beethoven contemporary and needed to be combined into a conductor's score of about 700 pages. They are prepared by an academic editor and were lacking any underlying concept regarding the preparation of a full orchestra setup or a singer list. So a good collaborative preparation would of course have been to use a template from the outset. The whole bundle was so chaotic that work on this project had been stopped and had stayed on hold for several years already. We first converted everything to Sibelius and ran a data comparison to sort out duplicates. Then a digital analysis calculated the missing staves, and a batch routine added them to every single file in order to harmonize the setup. Now the whole puzzle could be combined in 3 big files. Not enough. After we sent in the compiled score for proofing, it came back from the editor covered in red. Let's see if you can see that. Good. What happened here is that every single appearance of certain global notational changes was marked up, making it hard to find the real correction. Like every box here is a shorthand for saying put it on 1 stem instead of 2 stems. So stems up, stems down in the whole opera was made differently. But think about the rules. Because if you really have a look at this closer, that means that hours of work have been spent on these 700 pages just to mark them up, and then hours of work have to be spent again just to find out what really has to be done. And it comes down to actually 4 mistakes on that page. The rest can be addressed globally, once you know the rules, of course. So, again, we need to talk, therefore, about our goals and how to intend to get there from the outset, of course. Good. Success stories are selling better, I know that, but we learn more from failure. Therefore, here comes another one. With the increasing number of parties involved, things tend to become more complicated, of course, especially when artistic and economic interests collide, which is the case almost always, isn't it? 15 years ago, we were working on an avant-garde opera. This time from a living composer and renowned conductor. The score master had been hand-copied, but already it had been performed quite a lot, as you can see. The job was tough because of the length and the huge setup with dense and complex notation. There was no deadline fixed. The publisher had hired an external copy editor to whom we addressed our questions. But the flow of communication was very slow, and many times we had to interrupt the work for weeks or even months just because we were waiting for answers. You can imagine it's psychologically very tiring if you have to stop and find your way back into that flow on such a big scale work. So the piece was already fairly advanced from our side when we needed to stop once again to clarify certain important notational rules. After many failed attempts with the publisher to get the thing done, and as an act of self-defense, I announced that we would cancel the contract and send the work back. We were simply exhausted from restarting over and over again. So I don't know what you would have done. Another deadline went by, and so it came. The publisher immediately cut off our business relation, but we were free again to tackle other work. Act 2 on that. Funnily enough, about 10 years later, this piece mysteriously came back to us. In the meantime, the engraving had been completed somehow by someone invisible. The original publishing house had been sold to a global player. The entire personnel had changed. Now the music had to be revised again for a new production in Vienna. The conductor had some ideas about the revision, and so did the composer. They were not necessarily matching. And this is a sample from an editor's correction list showing his emotional state. Yeah, as I said, the work was intricate and of course costly. So the publisher was not exactly pleased and cancelled our contract shortly before we could continue. So, bottom line again, without a reliable editorial closing date, or what we would in German call Redaktionsschluss, things will go south. Good, a new chapter and a more successful. Corpus Monodicum deals with neumes. We have seen beautiful examples of that. I will show you another one. To be more precise with, I quote, the historically significant sacred and secular monophonic repertoires of the European Middle Ages with Latin texts. It is comprised of thousands of sources from at least 5 centuries, like this, and it's considered to be a figurehead of institutionally funded musicology. Here are a lot of labels. So music from the preprint era is a troublesome field for computer engraving. I guess a lot of you have experience in that era. We have 2 main obstacles here. The non-measured nature of the melodies and the primacy of the sung texts, since neumes are always added to previously existing texts. So to our knowledge, no available notation software were offering any practical solution here. Therefore, we decided, in a cooperation with a software development company based in Dresden, that we should tailor a collaborative browser-based tool to meet with these requirements. Music was encoded by use of the MEI scheme, to which we were able to contribute as well. Monodi, as it is called, served 2 purposes. As a notation software, it filled the gap that Finale and Sibelius didn't cater for. With a simple graphic interface, the scholar was allowed to enter the data easily in a direct way. Due to the storage of a remote server, on a remote server, and the collaborative nature of Monodi, the foundation for a real digital edition was made possible. This shifted the entire project scope more and more towards the digital humanities. We used then the data of Monodi to lay out the traditional print output by a fully automated process. We also helped the scholars to redesign the glyphs for the transcription to modern notation. Today this project has joined forces with the academic artificial intelligence team. The idea of collaboration will surely bring new findings. And now for something more colorful. Upon the recommendation of Daniel Bradbury, thanks again Daniel, we were approached by Björk's management and took over a bunch of Sibelius files for her upcoming songbook. These files had been circulating over a span of 6 years, both amongst European as well as Hollywood-based engravers. So you may ask why, because it looks quite simple, doesn't it? The challenge here was to convince Björk's label, who has never worked on sheet music before, to accept a certain workflow. The full content would first need to be completed in every detail before the desired color schemes and certain decorative details could be applied. Remember, I was talking about Redaktionsschluss, something along these lines. The reason is, of course, that Sibelius cannot color bar lines or staff lines and certain other elements. This would all need to be done afterwards by a graphic application. Together with Chester Music in London and their editor Tom Farncombe, we tried really hard, but we failed to communicate this. So Björk insisted, or her team, on only seeing full colored proofs. This was the point when we decided to try Lilliput, which should be able to address all items and apply color to these. Urs was our partner in crime. After some obstacles regarding the conversion from Sibelius to Lilliput and a rapidly approaching deadline, we changed horses again. Now we used a combined plugin and batch processing routine to automatically apply the color schemes in Illustrator after each of the 11 proofs. So thanks to Thomas, who did the programming, it worked out nicely. Yeah. I'm convinced that in a market as tight and competitive as ours, a collaborative approach is absolutely key. We need to bring the expertise together again and push innovation. There is still a lot of potential to make our workflows more efficient. Thomas will expand on that after the break when he asks, are we digital yet? We haven't talked about the future yet, but to present music only in nice and elegant layouts will soon not be enough. Quality in music engraving is no longer limited to the visual appeal. The proper encoding of the content will become more and more important. We already see a lot of mobile applications. Almost all of them still hold music as a dumb image. But with the invasion of artificial intelligence, consistent and well-structured data sets will soon be in demand. This is not science fiction. We are at the brink of a major change with foreign personnel coming into our traditional craft. Like 500 years ago, when printing provoked a paradigm shift, we need to rethink music representation once more. I believe it's our duty as engravers to contribute and collaborate so that music notation will remain a cultural technology and a craft. A human craft driven by human error, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these fascinating insights and active life. Are there any questions?
You told us about several very interesting projects that ran aground, where there was a failure. Did you have any you can mention that were really good, you're proud of?
Sorry, the last one, if I have a recommendation.
Tell us about one or two that you're proud of, that worked, the collaboration worked, and why did it work?
Well, of course, I did not show every successful. I picked some of these that I thought might be interesting in showing what happens if people not communicate. So, I mean, only one of these jobs did not come to life. The rest were managed, but at which cost, of course. Even that one that didn't work out with us, somehow it went to the press. I don't know, it's not visible. Yes, we completed successfully some of our jobs.
So most of the time, engravers are not listed in the scores. Do you suggest that we start including them in our publications?
Okay, I have a long history of struggle with music publishing houses about that, but I am lucky to say that today I don't accept not being mentioned.
Everybody in your team?
No, just the team,
Okay.
because that would be another preface then. Too complicated.
They have everybody in Hollywood movies.
No, but this is a very important point when we talk about becoming visible. I mean, in print literature publications, the book binder is named, the persons who wrap the paper around are named, and the typeface is named, and all that stuff. And I don't see why we should not do something similar in our approach. I am the moderator, or are you the moderator?
You will find out soon.
I think you were first.
So thank you very much. I was very impressed when you had to compile all this huge amount of scores for the opera. Mm-hmm. And you made some automatic changes using an algorithm. And then you had to compare which changes were made using your eyes.
No.
No? No,
using the XML underlying data.
Ah, good, great. So my question is, if there is an automatic way to detect changes as a version control system in software, in writing code, there is Git, for example, GitHub, so you can have all the intermediate states of code.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you. Please stay put, and Thomas will expand on that just after the coffee break.
There is some. Okay, thank you.
I would like to actually continue on the first two questions. You were saying like becoming visible. And all the examples that you mentioned simply sound like not just becoming visible, but also being taken seriously as a music. Because like you were saying, because you were also saying, let us ourselves like to compare it to some like different branch, right? We're saying an engineering project, and there is a deadline, there is a project to be fulfilled and everything. And if it doesn't happen, of course, it doesn't happen and the project fails. Why is this not included in the workflow in your own work? And this is basically the I'm coming back to my question. Aren't we as music engravers not taken serious?
So what do you mean by serious? I mean, I think we are taken serious when it comes to our expertise for which we are seen or visible. I have repeatedly made the experience that even customers we work for a long time together do not really know what we actually are able to do. Giving a very simple, trivial example is, oh, you use Finale as well. Okay, yeah. Or you know a bit about graphic applications. You can use Illustrator, you can use InDesign. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. So this is the first step, but this all happens when you sit together and talk as partners. Then you share your expertises and you share the challenges that need to be addressed. Yeah, in general you're right, and I'm not blaming any publishing house or something, but there is a strange economic situation here, and there is of course artists involved. And this changed a lot, the whole picture. And sometimes I wish it could be handled like the other trades you have mentioned, but I'm afraid it can't.
Thank you.
Maybe I could continue there from the point of the publisher. I think one of the key issues that we're dealing with is that publishers are still very traditional in their approach of everything. You know, they are old economy companies. Very few of them have actually modernized to become companies that can deal also with modern project management. That's as you know, of course, that's a very serious problem that also we publishers face. Just out of experience, we've had a huge digital project going at Ingers, and I was suddenly confronted with the world of IT in a depth that I've never been before, although I'm very close to IT from my background. Suddenly I was confronted with things like Scrum as running projects. Yes, you're all laughing, but for a traditional publisher, this is something like, oh my god.
It's the same for traditional engravers.
And the crazy thing was that I was so incredibly impressed because suddenly everything became so transparent in front of me. I knew about epics, sprints, you know, deadlines you were talking about, all of these things. They are simply not really installed, inhaled in what we're doing. So we have to somehow do the same step that you're involved in too. We have to do them somehow with everyone that's working for us. And it's a huge step.
I can't agree more. When you start with that?
Sorry? Because we've become very much more ready.
This was not a personal address.
No.
When does the industry start with that, I would like to say?
When the industry is prepared to face it, and because it's all about money at the end of the day. If I may add a question that I had in mind, you've done so much research and development with the projects that you've shown. Has that been appreciated by the publishers in the sense of have they actually paid you for that? Or did they in the end just pay for the pages delivered?
Can we talk about that?
But it's an important issue in this place here.
We managed to survive. Yes, please.
We're talking about communication and collaboration. Would there be any point, or would there be the idea of the engravers beginning by communicating, collaborating, and forming some kind of a representative body, even if it is very loose, chaotic, artistic, and creative?
Like a syndicate.
Yes. We kind of begin to explain ourselves
Yes.
to the world.
Look, some years ago, I was trying to do some research in what is our business, what is it worth, for example. A simple fact, the music industry has statistics about the sales of records, the sales of sheet music in a very rough way, but not the production situation behind. So there's no statistical data. I was in touch for over a long period with experienced people in that area, but they couldn't come up with anything. And I'm sorry to say that it wasn't in the interest of the publishing houses, at least until recently, to show these kind of figures to anyone. So yeah, and then I thought I could spend half of my life in trying to put something together, but I need to follow my day job. So I prefer to this route. But you're right, we need to come together, and therefore I was so pleased to hear from that meeting, because it's a start, and as we have seen this morning, there is a huge need to come together.
Maybe some talks we're going to start.